Super Bowl 59 is set. The best team in the NFC, the Philadelphia Eagles, will take on the best team in the AFC and reigning Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs, in a rematch of Super Bowl 57. And my team, the San Francisco 49ers, didn't even make the playoffs. Actually, don't tell anyone, but earlier this month I was in Seattle for a math conference and got a Seattle Space Needle t-shirt, which I have on underneath this. And you know, wearing anything Seattle's a problem for a 49er fan. Actually, that might be a better name for the Sea Chickens. The Seattle Space Needles. They tower over the competition. What do you think? And yes, I am coping with the 49ers not making the playoffs by taking cheap shots at the Seattle Sea Chickens. Now, I may be a mathematician and a total nerd, but I also love a good football game. And one of the things that I love about football actually has to do with math. Unlike other high-paced sports like basketball, which I also love, by the way, American football includes a lot of strategy and misdirection. The best coaches and players use logic and the rules of the game to their advantage. You can see this from the most basic examples of things like time management, where coaches will use their timeouts to strategically stop the clock as opposed to actually giving their players a break, or kneeling out a game when the other team doesn't have any timeouts in order to end it in their favor. Occasionally, you get incredible feats of logic and knowing the rules, like this play back in a December 2012 game where Randall Cobb of the Green Bay Packers, instead of fielding the second half kickoff at the 4-yard line and trying to run for a gain, instead stepped out of bounds before touching the ball, which also makes the ball out of bounds and resulted in a penalty on Tennessee and the Green Bay Packers getting the ball on the 40-yard line. I mean, that's like Magic the Gathering level of game manipulation via the rules, and a perfect example of game theory and logic, and hence mathematics, in action. But that's not how I want to apply mathematics to the NFL today. Instead, I want to analyze the structure of the NFL playoffs using linear modeling. Hey, a geometer I know went to the beach the other day to catch some rays. He came back a tangent. And if you like that joke, hit that subscribe button. And if you didn't, hit the subscribe button anyway, because we want you to be part of the Scholar Sauce community. All right, let's get back to the video. Since the beginning of the Super Bowl era in 1967, the NFL has employed various different types of playoff formats in order to accommodate for the creation of new teams or redistributing divisions. One such change occurred recently with the NFL Players Association's collective bargaining agreement with the NFL in 2020 that expanded the number of playoff teams from 12 to 14, 7 per conference. This has been met with a lot of controversy, with a lot of fans either arguing for going back to 12 teams or expanding even further. Regardless, how the NFL playoffs are structured dramatically affects the overall season-long strategies that teams employ in order to give themselves the best chance of making it to the Super Bowl. And today on Scholar Sauce, we're going to compute the possible formats for the NFL playoffs and discuss the advantages and disadvantages of each kind of format. To start, let's look at the playoff formats that have been used by the NFL during the nearly 60-year-long history of the Super Bowl era. During the first few seasons of the Super Bowl era, the Super Bowl was a championship game between the two separate professional football leagues, the NFL with 15 teams and the AFL with 9 teams. In the season leading up to Super Bowl I, each league had 2 divisions, and the division leaders, that is, the team in each division that had the best record, would compete in a championship game for their league, and then the winner of that game went and played in the Super Bowl. This meant that there were 4 playoff teams, 2 from each league, and a total of 2 weeks of games. For comparison later, this meant that only 13.3% of teams from the NFL and 22.2% of teams from the AFL made the playoffs that year. From the 1967 season to the 1969 season, that is Super Bowls 2 through 4, the NFL, now with 16 teams, hello Saints, was organized into 4 divisions, each with 4 teams. The 4 division leaders would play each other in a standard 4-team single elimination tournament over the course of 2 weeks to determine the NFL champion. Similarly, the AFL, now with 10 teams, hello Bengals, yeah, we're not going to do that every time, advanced their 2 division leaders along with the 2 non-division leaders that were the best in the league for another 4-team single elimination tournament. Then the NFL champion and the AFL champion would play each other in the Super Bowl. This meant that during this period, 25% of the NFL and 40% of the AFL made the playoffs. By the way, the playoffs depicted here were the 1969 playoffs, which was the first time the Kansas City Chiefs won the Super Bowl, and it was their last Super Bowl appearance until 2020. The NFL and AFL completely merged in 1970 into the NFL and reorganized all 26 teams into 2 conferences, the NFC and the AFC. Each conference had 13 teams with 3 divisions each. Two divisions in each conference had 4 teams, while the other division had 5. And for the next 8 years, the division leaders from each conference and 1 wildcard team, which was the non-division leader team with the best record, would make the playoffs. Each conference had a 4-team single elimination tournament like before, and the champion from each conference faced off in the Super Bowl. During that time, the NFL expanded by 2 additional teams for a total of 28 teams. This meant that 28.6% to 30.8% of teams from each conference made the playoffs during this period. From 1978 to 1989, the NFL added a second wildcard team to the playoff mix. The two wildcard teams played each other in the first week of the playoffs, with the three divisional winners all getting a bye week until the second week. The winner of the wildcard round would advance to the divisional round to take the fourth remaining spot, and the rest of the conference playoffs would be a four-team single elimination tournament, with the winner of each tournament advancing to the Super Bowl. This is where the terminology of the first week of the playoffs being called Wild Card Weekend and the second week being called the Divisional Round came from. It also introduced the idea of a bye week into the playoff structure, changing it from a typical single elimination tournament. They had to do this because with 5 teams from each conference making the playoffs, you can't fit that into a typical single elimination tournament schedule, which always has to have a number of teams equal to a power of 2 because the number of teams is cut in half each week. With 10 teams out of 28 making the playoffs each year during this time, 35.7% of teams made the playoffs. By the way, the playoffs displayed was the 49ers' second Super Bowl win in a row, and the reason why I'll be rooting for the Eagles next week, hoping to prevent the Chiefs upsetting the 49ers' record of the longest Super Bowl winning streak, along with the Chiefs, Patriots, Broncos, Cowboys, Steelers twice, Dolphins, and the Packers. No one should win 3 in a row until the 49ers do it, which could be never. Come on, Shanahan! In 1990, a third wildcard team was added to the playoffs, leading to a total of 6 teams making the playoffs. To make this fit, the NFL gave 2 byes instead of 3, with the lowest seeded divisional leader having to compete in the wildcard round. With 12 out of 28 teams making the playoffs, the percentage of teams making the playoffs initially during this period ballooned to 42.9%. In 1995, 2 additional teams were added to the NFL, meaning that 40% of teams made the playoffs. A 31st team was added in 1999, making it 38.7%, and the final NFL team of the modern era was added in 2002, and the league was reorganized into 4 4-team divisions in each conference. Since the number of division leaders at the end of the season went up by 1, the number of wildcard teams that was reduced back down to 2 so that 6 teams from each conference still made the playoffs. This meant that 37.5% of teams made the playoffs, and it remained this way until the 2020 season. By the way, the set of playoffs displayed here was the first time since 1969 that the Kansas City Chiefs made the Super Bowl, and since then, they have only missed the Super Bowl once, including this year. That is, they made 5 of the last 6 Super Bowls, including this year's, a feat not even the New England Patriots under Tom Brady did. I may be a 49er fan, but you gotta give that respect. I still don't want them to three-peat, though. In 2020, the playoffs expanded to 14 teams making the playoffs, 7 from each conference. To make this work, only 1 team gets a bye, and the other 6 teams play in the wild card round to fill out the 3 spots necessary to have 2 games in the divisional round. This means that 43.8% of teams make the playoffs, which is the largest percentage of the league to make the playoffs in the history of the league, but still the second smallest percentage compared to the 3 other major sports leagues in America right now. The MLB has 12 of 30 teams make the playoffs for 40% of the league. The NHL has 16 of 31 teams make the playoffs for 51.6%, and the NBA has 16 of 30 teams make the playoffs for the largest percentage of 53.3% of the league making the playoffs. This new 7 teams per conference format has a lot of fans buzzing about rehashing the playoff structure. Some want to go back to a 6-team format, others want to expand to 8 teams. At least part of the argument hinges around the value of the bye week and how that affects team strategy during the season. With all the buzz around playoff structure, this got me wondering just what are the possible configurations for the NFL playoffs. Given 32 teams and 2 16-team conferences with a certain number making the playoffs and some number of those getting a bye week, well, all this brings us to some linear modeling. A few things to consider here are, since the playoffs for each conference are symmetric, we will only model the tournament structure for a single conference of 16 teams. The other conference structure is identical. Second, for the divisional round to lead to a conference championship game, there can only be 2 games in the divisional round. This means that only 4 teams will play in the divisional round, and those teams will either get there via a bye or by winning a game in the wild card round. Similarly, the wild card round will have no more than 8 teams in 4 games, but there could be fewer to account for teams with byes to the divisional round. To set up this problem and be able to identify the possible configurations for the NFL playoffs, we first need to define some variables. Let's let B be the number of teams that get byes to the divisional round. Let's let E be the number of remaining team slots in the divisional round, N be the total number of playoff teams in the conference, D be the number of teams that are in the divisional round, and W be the number of teams in the wild card round. We know a few things immediately. First, D equals 4, since the number of teams in the divisional round has to be that so that there are only 2 teams in the conference championship. However, we also know that the number of teams in the divisional round will include any bye week team plus any extra slots for teams. This means that B plus E equals D, which is equal to 4, and hence E has to be equal to 4 minus B. Note that the number of available spots E in the divisional round has to be equal to half the number of teams in the wild card round, since each team that takes one of those extra slots has to come from winning a game in the wild card round, which would have 2 teams in it. That is, W over 2 has to be equal to E, which is 4 minus B, or W is equal to 8 minus 2B. Now this equation makes a lot of sense here, because if there are no bye week teams, then the wild card round has to have 8 teams, so that there are 4 in the divisional round. But each bye week team replaces a needed game in the wild card round and hence takes away 2 teams in the wild card round. Thus the wild card round is equal to 8 minus 2 times each bye week team. We also know that the total number of teams in the playoffs are the wild card teams plus the number of byes, and hence N is equal to W plus B, but W is 8 minus 2B, and hence this results in N is equal to 8 minus B. Since B, E, W, and N are all non-negative integers and E is equal to 4 minus B, this yields that there are precisely 5 potential formats for a playoff structure of 1 wild card round, 1 divisional round, and a conference championship, where some number of teams can earn byes to the divisional round. These are determined by the size of B, where B is equal to 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. This is a table of the potential formats of what B, E, W, and N would all be accordingly. Note that the 7-team format with 1 bye is what the NFL currently uses. The 4-team format with 4 byes is what you'd get if you didn't have a wild card round, hence why W equals 0 there. The NFL has used all these formats before except for the 8-team format. The 4-team format is what the NFL used near the beginning of the Super Bowl era from 1967 to 1977. The 5-team format was used from 1978 to 1989, the 6-team format was used from 1990 to 2019, and the 7-team format has been used from 2020 until now. You can also see the playoff structures of the other 3 major professional leagues. The MLB uses the 6-team per conference format, and the NHL and NBA use the 8-team format. And there does seem to be some push for the NFL to move to the 8-team format, and some push to go back to the 6-team format. You can just Google either of those and you'll find plenty of support for both. One main argument either way is the proportion of the league that makes the playoffs. And so I've indicated in this table the percentage of the NFL that would make the playoffs in each conference tournament format. You can see that ranges anywhere from 25% to 50%. From here, I was curious at what kind of playoff structures were possible if you went all the way up to allowing all the teams into the playoffs. I definitely don't advocate for that, but I was curious what was possible. Now, you can't get any bigger than 8 teams per conference if you use a 3-round wildcard divisional conference championship format. So to make room for more teams, we would have to expand to a 4-round playoff structure, which I'll call the wildcard round, the first divisional round, the second divisional round, and the conference championship. Initially, let's still allow teams to earn a bye, but only to the first divisional round. And in this case, we have the following variables. B is equal to the number of byes to the first divisional round. E is equal to the number of remaining team slots in the first divisional round. N is equal to the number of playoff teams in the conference. D2 is the number of teams in the second divisional round. D1 is the number of teams in the first divisional round. And W is the number of teams in the wild card round. Now we know right off the bat that D2 has to be equal to 4, since those teams have to play in 2 games to provide the teams for the conference championship. But since there are no byes to the second divisional round, we also know that these 4 teams all won a game in the first divisional round, and hence D1 has to be equal to 8 to accommodate for games of 2 teams each to produce 4 winners. However, the teams in the first divisional round get there either via a bye or by winning a game in the wild card round, and hence D1 also equals the sum of byes and remaining slots in the first divisional round. That is B plus E, and thus B plus E has to be equal to 8, or E is equal to 8 minus B. The extra slots in the first divisional round come from winners of games in the wild card round, and hence E is equal to half the number of players in the wild card round, or E equals W over 2, which is equal to 8 minus B, and hence W has to be equal to 16 minus 2B, which like before indicates that the wild card round will have 16 teams in it minus 2 teams for each bye, because each bye week team removes the need for a game in the wild card round. Finally, we know that the number of teams in the wildcard round plus the number of byes is the total number of teams, and hence n is equal to w plus b, which is equal to 16 minus 2b plus b, and hence n is equal to 16 minus b. Again, since n, w, e, and b are all non-negative integers, this allows for a total of 9 possible playoff formats, one for each value of b, which can be any integer from 0 to 8. These possible formats are displayed in this table. Note that the 16-team 0-bye week format would just be a typical 16-team single elimination tournament. This is what the NCAA March Madness tournament does for each of the 4 legs of that tournament that lead to a Final Four spot. The 8-team format eliminates the need for the wild card round, which is why W equals 0, and is identical to the 8-team format from the previous table. I've also included the percentages of the NFL that would make the playoffs in each format, and they of course range from 50% to 100% of teams making the playoffs. This is all interesting to see what can happen, and it's all linear because it's based on linear modeling. However, none of these options in this second table are particularly realistic, as they just let too many teams in. In order to find more interesting playoff structures that yield truly different alternatives while also not letting too many teams in, we have to remove some of the restrictions here. To do this, let's keep the 4-round playoff structure, but let's introduce the concept of a super bye. A super bye would be a double bye week. That is a bye to the second divisional round. Whether such a thing would ever be considered is neither here nor there, but it certainly allows for some wonky playoff structures. So let's use the same linear modeling ideas and have a little bit of fun imagining some weird ways to do the NFL playoffs. The setup is similar. We'll define some variables to start. Let's let S be equal to the number of byes to the second divisional round, the super byes. E2 will be the number of remaining slots in the second divisional round. Let's let B be equal to the number of byes to the first divisional round, and E1 be equal to the number of remaining team slots in the first divisional round. N, of course, is still going to be the total number of playoff teams in each conference. D2 is going to be the number of teams in the second divisional round. D1 is going to be the number of teams in the first divisional round, with W being the number of teams in the wild card round. Just as before, D2 has to be equal to 4, but this time D2 is also the sum of the super byes and the extra slots in the second divisional round, E2. That is, S plus E2 is equal to D2, which equals 4, and hence E2 has to be 4 minus S. The extra slots in the second divisional round all come from wins in the first divisional round, and hence must equal half the number of teams in the first divisional round. That is, D1 over 2 is equal to E2, which is 4 minus S, and hence D1 has to be equal to 8 minus 2S. On the other hand, the total number of teams in the first divisional round, D1, must also equal the number of byes B to that round and the number of extra slots E1, and hence B plus E1 is equal to D1, which equals 8 minus 2S, and hence E1 is equal to 8 minus 2S minus B. The number of extra slots in the first divisional round are all filled by teams that win in the wild card round, and hence E1 must be equal to half the number of teams in the wild card round to account for each of those games. That is, W over 2 is equal to E1, which was equal to 8 minus 2S minus B, and hence W is equal to 16 minus 4S minus 2B. This is a really nice equation because it shows that for each super bye team, it eliminates the need for a game in the divisional round, and hence 2 games in the wild card round, thus reducing the number in the wild card round by 4 teams. Each regular bye team only eliminates the need for a game in the wild card round, and hence reduces the number in the wild card round by 2. Finally, the total number of playoff teams is the number of teams in the wild card round plus the number of byes plus the number of super byes. Thus, N has to be equal to W plus B plus S, or 16 minus 4S minus 2B plus B plus S, and hence N is equal to 16 minus 3S minus B. Notice that E2, E1, D1, W, and N all depend on choices for the number of byes, B, and super byes, S. Moreover, since E2, E1, D1, W, N, B, and S are all non-negative integers, and E2 equals 4 minus S, while E1 equals 8 minus 2S minus B, we know that S is going to be an integer between 0 and 4, and B is going to be an integer between 0 and 8. However, even some combinations of those will have to be thrown out because they will make E1 negative. This does mean, however, to depict the possible choices for each of the 5 values of E2, E1, D1, W, and N using a table, we will have to use a 5 by 9 table for each value. These tables are depicted here. Now let's unpack what these 5 tables are telling us. First off, any scenario that leads to a negative number for any value is not physical. So let's delete those from the table. This leaves a total of 25 distinct tournament structures. The next interesting thing to note about these tables is that the previous 2 types of tournament structures are included in them. All the situations where there are 0 super buys are simply the table from our previous 4-round tournament exploration of just the number of buys to the first divisional round. The places in the table corresponding to an empty wildcard round are just the 5 possible tournaments in our 3-round tournament explanation, where the buys in these tables become the wildcard teams in the 3-round tournament and the super buys become the buys. So these tables actually include all the exploration we did before, which accounts for 13 of these 25 tournament structures. What's new here are the remaining 12 tournament structures that I haven't yet colored. And you'll notice that there are still some new tournament structures available that use fewer than half the teams in the league. In fact, there are 5 such structures. Let's take a closer look at these tournament structures. Specifically, let's look at all the viable tournament structures that use half or fewer of the teams so that we can get an idea of just how many options the NFL realistically has. We have organized these playoff structures according to the number of teams involved and have included tournament seeding according to the usual standard. For n equals 4, we only have the standard 4-team single elimination tournament. This has the advantage that only the divisional winners make the playoffs. It has the disadvantage of only including 25% of the league, which is probably too little. Moreover, since the NFL gives the top 4 seeds to the division winners regardless of overall record, this does not guarantee that the best teams necessarily make the playoffs. For n equals 5, we only get this one here with 1 wildcard team. The NFL originally used this when they had 3 divisions because it ensured that the divisional winners got a bye week. However, with 4 divisions, one of those division winners would play in the wild card round. For n equals 6, we have 2 tournament structures. The one the NFL used from 1990 to 2019 with the top 2 teams getting a bye and the other 4 teams playing the wild card round. It's also the current playoff format that the MLB uses. Now we come to our first wonky tournament structure that employs super buys. In this 6-team format, there are 3 super buys to the second divisional round and 1 bye to the first divisional round. These would be taken by the divisional leaders, and then the wild card round would consist of just 2 teams playing to determine who would face off against the lowest seeded divisional winner. This is like adding a play-in game for the 5-team tournament, where 2 teams compete for who gets to join the division leaders. This structure doesn't seem particularly realistic to me, as it just waits too long for 3 teams to duke it out to determine who likely gets to lose to the number 1 seed. Unless it's the Lions. Sorry, too soon? For n equals 7, there are 3 distinct tournament structures. The first is the current tournament that the NFL uses here with just the 1 bye team and 3 wildcard games. Introducing super buys, we get 2 different tournaments. The first super bye 7-team format has 3 super buys and no regular buys. 4 teams compete in the wildcard round and the 2 winners compete in the first divisional round to determine who plays the 1 seed, which, just like the n equals 6 tournament with super buys, seems like an awful waste of time just to determine who likely loses to the number 1 seed. What? I'm not going to razz the Lions again. The second Super Bye 7-team format has 2 Super Buys and 3 buys. The remaining 2 teams play in the wild card round to determine who will face the number 3 seed. This format seems more realistic than the n equals 6 tournament with Super Buys or the first n equals 7 Super Bye tournament. One advantage is that it ensures that all the division leaders get a bye of some kind, along with the best non-division leader team, so that's something. Overall, I think the NFL would be pretty unlikely to use this format. There are also 3 distinct tournament formats that use 8 teams. The first is the standard 8-team single elimination tournament that the NBA and the NHL use. I also think that this is the most likely format that the NFL would go to if they expanded to 8 playoff teams, just because it's the simplest. With Super Buys, there are 2 additional tournaments that are kind of interesting. The first one is this one here that has 1 Super Buy and 5 regular buys. The remaining 2 teams play in the wild card round to determine who plays the number 2 seed in the first divisional round. This is essentially the same as the current 7-team NFL playoffs with a play-in game for the team that goes up against the number 2 seed. And again, this seems pretty unlikely for the NFL to use, although it does mean that all the divisional winners get a bye. Finally, we come to the last Super Bye 8-team tournament, and really the only of the Super Bye tournaments that I think could make for a reasonable 8-team playoff structure, particularly if you had 4 divisions. This playoff structure has 2 super buys and 2 regular buys. The top 2 division winners get the super buys, while the remaining 2 division winners get the regular buys. This ensures that winning a division matters and results in at least 1 bye week, but that being the better division winners can push you even later into the tournament. The next 4 best teams in the conference after the division winners would get the 4 wild card spots and play for which 2 teams advance to the first divisional round. Another nice effect of this is that the name of each round actually means something again. Only wild card teams play in the wild card tournament, and all the division winners are guaranteed a game in a divisional round. Now, the major disadvantage of this is that it isn't clear whether 2 bye weeks would actually be beneficial for a team. While it could certainly help them get healthy, would 2 weeks off really keep a team as sharp as it should be? Well, what do you think? Let me know in the comments which of these playoff structures you think would work best, and whether you think any of these super bye tournaments are actually viable. If you liked this video, hit the like button and subscribe to Scholar Sauce for more fun mathematics content. We're almost at 2,000 subscribers, so please also share it with your friends. In the meantime, enjoy the Super Bowl, but for the love of the game, Eagles, you gotta beat the Chiefs! You can't let them get away with a three-peat. I don't care if they have all the Taylor Swift fans behind them. Sorry about that. Anyway, while I go ponder the future of the 49ers and rethink my life because I'm going to root for the freaking Eagles, check out this video here where I show that classic JRPG world maps were actually donuts, or this playlist here where I react to Alan Becker's amazing animation versus math content, or this playlist here where I talk about every type of math there is. And we'll see you next time on Scholar Sauce. Go Eagles!